I honestly cannot believe the scandal of the day that the media absolutely concocted out of thin air and yet seem to believe and are trying to turn into a major scandal, obviously trying to impact and influence the outcome of the election by blatantly lying about what Donald Trump said, taking his words that are very standard in liberal discourse about warmongers in D.C. and somehow converting it into a threat that they say he made to have Liz Cheney executed by a firing squad. And on every network, there was appearing journalists and anchors and liberal pundits and Democratic Party operatives all day, all over social media and all over television, waxing indignantly that Donald Trump, someone who might become our president, is now openly speaking about executing his political opponents by firing squad. Now, let's look at the actual words that Donald Trump spoke. This was last night at an event hosted by Tucker Carlson and broadcast on the Tucker Carlson network.
Is it weird for you to see Liz Cheney, that'd be Dick Cheney's repulsive little daughter, running against you with Kamala Harris?
Well, I think it hurts Kamala a lot, actually. Look, she's a deranged person. But the reason she couldn't stand me is that she always wanted to go to war with people. I don't want to go to war. She wanted to stay in Syria. I took them out. She wanted to stay in Iraq. I took them out. I mean, if it were up to her, we'd be in 50 different countries. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I used to I'd have meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people.
I mean, the meaning of that could not be any clearer. Trump's not always the clearest speaker. He doesn't always express his thoughts with perfect clarity. But in this case, he actually spoke in a very cogent way, a very easy to understand way. And his point was so obvious, in part because it has been made for so long, primarily by liberals, by people on the left, especially during the war on terror, when there were all these neocons and George Bush and Dick Cheney, none of whom fought in the military, in wars, none of them who joined the military, many of whom evaded military service led by Liz Cheney's father, Dick Cheney. And there was a common argument that, look, the reason these people are so eager to send others to war is because they're never the ones who have to go fight them. They should go fight the wars that they want to start, because that'll make for a more responsible war policy. The way that monarchs in Europe used to lead their armies into war, when they wanted to go to war, they wouldn't sit in their castles, they would go and actually fight. It's expected of even the British royal family now. When the British had that dumb war with Argentina over the Falklands, the brother of the current British king, Prince Charles, who is Prince Andrew, who's been disgraced by the Epstein scandal, went and fought in that war. And that's expected of a tradition of European leaders and European royalty, and it's not at all a tradition in the United States. Most of the time, people cheerleading wars and sending others to war are people who have never seen a war, who have evaded war. And he was making that point. If Liz Cheney loves war so much, let's give her a rifle. And she can go be the one who they're aiming at to kill and facing the consequences of the war. And then maybe she'll come back and she won't love war as much as she does. This is so basic, so common, it's so clear what he said. He was asked about it again today because the media has turned this into just such a melodramatic scandal. You can go look at every major news site like CNN, the Washington Post, New York Times, all Donald Trump returns to violent rhetoric by threatening Liz Cheney with execution. And so they asked him about it, and here's what he said when asked about it. He just repeated the argument in the same clear way.
Oh, yeah, sure. She's a war hawk. She kills people. She wanted to Even in my administration, she was pushing that we go to war with everybody. And I said, if you ever gave her a rifle and let her do the fighting, if you ever do that, she wouldn't be doing too well, I will tell you right now. But she's a war hawk. She wants to go kill people unnecessarily. And if she had to do it herself and she had to face the consequences of battle, she wouldn't be doing it. So it's easy for her to talk, but she wouldn't be doing it. She's actually a disgrace. Well, she is campaigning. I mean, she's campaigning for us. Yeah.
Mr. Trump, I'm sorry, guys. You said last time, President Trump, you said last time.
I mean, it could not be any clearer. And let me just show you the transcript of what he actually said. Because the fact that when you look at the transcript, it's even more amazing. The fact that the media actually took this and tried to claim that he was calling for the execution of Liz Cheney by firing squad. And we're going to show you examples of how much they did that. How shamelessly and unflinchingly they claimed that's what he was saying. So, as you heard in that video, Tucker Carlson said, what about Dick Cheney's creepy little daughter running around and campaigning for Kamala Harris? Did you ever expect to see that? And here was Trump's full response, the transcript of it. He said, quote, well, I think it hurts Kamala a lot, actually. Look, she's a deranged person. But the reason she couldn't stand me is that she always wanted to go to war with people. I don't want to go to war. She, Liz Cheney, wanted to she wanted to stay in Syria. I took them out. She wanted to stay in Iraq. I took them out. I mean, if it were up to her, we'd be in 50 different countries. She's a radical war hawk. So here he said, she's a radical war hawk. That was his critique that he was making of her. And then he said, let's put her with a rifle. Let's give her a rifle. And so she can stand there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it, when the guns are trained on her face rather than on the faces of the other people she wants sent to war. So just about this passage alone, how could anybody possibly believe that he was calling for Liz Cheney's execution by firing squad when the very beginning remarks he made was, let's give Liz Cheney a rifle? Is it common for people that you want to execute to first supply them with weapons? Wouldn't that seem pretty contrary to the plan to execute them? I mean, hey, we're going to execute you, but before we do, we'd like you to have this rifle. Maybe you can take out a few of our masked firing squad members before they get you. Just make it a little fair. Have a rifle. Hey, you're going to the electric chair. Do you want a rifle? Maybe you can shoot some people taking you there. Maybe you can escape that way. Obviously, when he says, let's give her a rifle and let her go do this fighting, he's just making the standard chicken hawk, warmonger critique that I remember like it was yesterday, all throughout the Bush and Cheney years, was one of the leading critiques, especially in the 2004 election, when you had John Kerry, who served in Vietnam, versus George Bush and Dick Cheney, who did not. This was over and over the primary argument that the left liberals made. And I know because I was around them all the time. I remember all of this. Was the standard argument. He went on, let's see how she feels about it, when the guns are trained on her face. And then he said, and this just makes it clear, I'm not editing anything out. He said, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, well, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person. And I had meetings with a lot of people, and she always wanted to go to war with people. Now, not only is that critique accurate about Liz Cheney, that one of the reasons she hates Donald Trump is because he kept trying to get out of wars. He kept criticizing neoconservative dogma. You can watch a YouTube video before we had the show that I did, as well as an article I wrote, because I sat there once and watched the House Armed Services Committee meet and debate for 14 hours. And the reason they were meeting and debating was because Trump had announced his agreement with the Taliban to remove American troops from Afghanistan, like he tried to do from Syria and Iraq. And Liz Cheney and a few other warmongers in the Republican Party, neocon types, joined with the pro-war Democrats to enact an amendment that would defund any attempt to remove troops from Afghanistan. And then you had a coalition of other people who wanted to leave Afghanistan, people like Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz a very bipartisan populist wing of each party who were saying, we should be out of Afghanistan yesterday. And that's why all these neocons are with the Democrats, because as Liz Cheney said, when she announced her and her father's endorsement of Kamala Harris, she said, I'm not only endorsing Kamala because I'm afraid of Trump or he's against democracy, it's because her foreign policy is closer to our family's foreign policy than a Trump-led Republican Party is. And that's why he's assailing these neocons, because he knows they're against him and he knows why they're against him. Now, here is how the New York Times today chose to report on those comments we just went over, by video, by transcript, and then the ones that he said again to clarify, even though it needed no clarification, it couldn't have been clearer. The New York Times, November 1st, Trump assails Liz Cheney and imagined guns, quote, shooting at her. Vice President Kamala Harris said that anyone who uses, quote, that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president. And then it went on to kind of compare Trump's rhetoric and tried to link it to all these other instances where they claim he was being violent, the bloodbath hoax, the January 6th stuff, all the different concocted scandals that they made. And it became the theme of the day, probably will be tomorrow as well. Here was Kamala Harris pouring fuel on the fire when she got off a plane and was asked about these comments by Trump.
I know Liz Cheney well enough to know that she is tough. She is incredibly courageous and has shown herself to be a true patriot at a very difficult time in our country.
Okay. Please just tell me one thing that Liz Cheney has ever done in her entire life that qualifies as principled or courageous. Just tell me one thing. She was born to someone who became the dominant political figure in the state of Wyoming. And that's the only reason she had a political career, because her dad got her into politics. She ran on her last name. And she was supporting everything that Trump was doing. She was supporting everything that George Bush and Dick Cheney were doing while they were in office. She still to this day says the invasion of the Iraq War is correct. Torture, rendition, CIA black sites, due process-free imprisonments, all of that she defends to this very day. Things that Democrats and liberals at the time were calling a destruction of the Constitution, war crimes, etc. Liz Cheney, to this very day, advocates that. This person that Kamala Harris is saying is so courageous and principled and such a patriot. And yes, it is true that she turned against Trump when January 6th happened, but that was because she was already removed from leadership because of her attempts to impede what many of Trump's policies before that, as I said, such as the attempt to withdraw from Afghanistan. And when, by the way, Liz Cheney first ran for Congress from Wyoming, her family's view on same-sex marriage was often stated very clearly. In fact, Dick Cheney was, I think, the first national politician ever to say that same-sex couples, the legality of same-sex couples should be recognized. He said that in his 2000 debate with the vice presidential candidate Al Gore. That was 11 years before Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton got around to defending same-sex marriage. And the reason is because Dick Cheney has a daughter, Mary Cheney, who is married to a woman. And he invoked libertarian principles and said, I don't think we should be telling adults with whom they can and can't get married. I despise Dick Cheney, but that is actually what he did. And he deserves credit for that. He was basically defending his daughter. Liz Cheney, though, when she ran for Congress, knew that if she came out in favor of same-sex marriage, that would be a harmful, politically harmful position to take in the red state of Wyoming. And so even though her sister was in a same-sex marriage, Liz Cheney came out and said she opposes same-sex marriage, opposes their recognition, and believes they're immoral. In other words, she trashed her own sister's marriage. She was very close to her sister. She went to their wedding. But to advance her own political career, she decided to condemn publicly the marriage of her sister. Even when Dick Cheney was running for vice president, that's not something he was willing to do. That's who Liz Cheney is, along with all the other things that she endorses to this very day. Here's how the Washington Post covered it. Quote, Trump embraces violent rhetoric, suggests Liz Cheney should have guns, quote, trained on her face. Can you believe this? I mean, can you actually believe it after listening to those videos and looking at the transcript that this is how they're framing this? Quote, the Republican nominee often describes graphic and gruesome scenes of crime and violence, real and imagined. Here's the Rolling Stone earlier today, quote, deranged Trump fantasizes about guns pointed at Liz Cheney's face. The former president told Tucker, it's so surreal watching them all do this. The former president told Tucker Carlson that the former Republican representative should have 9 barrels, quote, trained on her face. Here's a little bit of what happened this morning on Morning Joe. Here you can see, just let me set the stage for this. So here's Joe Scarborough talking to Mika Brzezinski. This is Joe Biden's favorite show because of what a partisan outlet it is. Joe Scarborough, by the way, for those of you who don't know, was considered a far-right Republican. He ran and was elected on the wave of Republicans who were elected in the 1990s and the midterm election in 1994 in response to Bill Clinton and his presidency led by Newt Gingrich, who was considered this conservative revolutionary. That was Joe Scarborough. And then once he got out of Congress, he got on MSNBC, and now he reads from the same DNC script that they all read from, but even more passionately. So here you have Joe Scarborough and his wife, Mika Brzezinski, wearing a USA flag on her T-shirt that she's displaying. And then here you have the Drudge Report, which is very mysterious what happened to the Drudge Report. It was very, very popular in the 1990s and the Clinton era and into the 2000s. It was Matt Drudge, who sort of a right-wing conservative libertarian type who had just had a huge impact on the media. This is an extremely well-read site. Nobody knows anymore if Matt Drudge is even there, if he sold it, if someone took it over. He never appears in public. And it's as anti-Trump as any resistance liberal you will find online. And the headline on the Trump Drudge Report, which Mika and Joe on Morning Joe and MSNBC decided to blow up into the majority of the picture, was Trump calls for Cheney's execution. Just, that's what MSNBC was showing today. And there at the bottom, in the graphic, it says, Donald Trump on Liz Cheney, quote, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her. Again, I mean, they're even acknowledging that Trump said, let's give her a rifle. Like, why would you do that if you wanted to execute someone? Here's a little bit of what the madness that they spewed on the network today.
It's General Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who Donald Trump also threatened with execution because he disagreed with Donald Trump on January the 6th. And he's one of the highest decorated, most highly decorated soldiers of this century. And they dismiss General Mark Milley as a meme. The Washington Post decides that when you have 2 of the most highly decorated soldiers of the 21st century, in Mark Milley and also in General John Kelly, that should be dismissed. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation here is Donald Trump is talking about Republicans here. He's talking about somebody that had a 95 ACU rating, somebody who has been the conservative for years, so more conservative in every way than Donald Trump. And yet, just because she's disloyal to him, just because she said there's something deeply wrong with a commander-in-chief allowing riots to go on, refusing to stop those riots, and in fact, going into his dining room alone, staring and looking at some of the most violent parts of the riot, rewinding them, watching them again, rewinding them, watching them again, while his vice president and Secret Service detail are locked up in the basement, and his Secret Service detail, Mike Pence, is calling their families and saying they don't think they're going to make it out alive, while cops are getting their heads crushed inside doors, getting beaten up, getting clubbed almost to death, within inches of their death, having bear spray sprayed on them. This is what is so dismissed day in and day out and day in and day out. And that is what Liz Cheney objected to, which is what the Wall Street Journal editorial page objected to at one time. And now, because Liz Cheney objected to those riots and the way things were handled, she's an enemy of the state to Donald Trump. And on his closing weekend, he's calling for 9 guns to be pointed at her face to execute her.
I don't know what to say. I mean, it's like watching mental patients who just got out of an institution, and they're all, for whatever reason, in front of the camera, and they're like babbling. I mean, this did not happen. None of this happened. Obviously, Donald Trump didn't even get close to saying any of that. And yet they cannot exercise any independent thought. They, as Jeff Bezos said, they only speak to and for each other. And as we're going to show you, there's a major message discipline system in place that punishes any journalist who steps even a little bit out of line, as a couple of little journalists did today, saying, I don't actually think Trump said that, and you'll see what happened to them. Now, one major reason why there's so much adoration of Liz Cheney and so much desire to rush to her defense and to not allow the critique that Donald Trump was actually making of the warmongers in Washington is because he was really speaking not only about Liz Cheney, as he said, but about neocons in general, people who never have gone into military service and yet cheer on and demand every war we fight, they cheer. They never want to end it. They want to start new wars. This is how the U.S. has become a country of endless wars. And those are neocons primarily who believe most in that doctrine that Trump attacks. And here is a crew of former Republicans who are the kind of never-Trump conservatives, as they call themselves, never-Trump Republicans who have started off being anti-Trump but have become full-fledged partisan cheerleaders for the Democratic Party. And this is all from the website that was created by one of the most despicable and dishonest and bloodthirsty neocons of all, Bill Kristol. We've devoted an entire show to him before about what he's done. This is his website, The Bulwark. And listen to these 3 never-Trump conservatives talk about what the Democratic Party has become. This was right after the day that Kamala Harris gave her big speech on the Mall. It got eclipsed by Joe Biden and his comments calling Trump supporters garbage. But she did give the speech on the Mall, and they're talking about how fantastic it was. But also listen to what they say about what Democrats have become.
They had clearly been like, look, it's our last chance. We're going to do it all in this speech, right? So we're going to make sure that people know child tax credit, and we're going to build housing, and we're going to cap insulin prices. Although I kind of thought they already did that, but maybe I don't have my policy as correct. But here was the thing about the cheering that I loved. Speaking of Stonewall, but also I think it's amazing when you get 75,000 presumably libs on the ellipse. And she's like, we're going to have the most lethal fighting force. And people are like, yeah. And she's like, and we're going to secure the border. And people are like, yeah. And I was just like, this is, and she's, we are going to be leaders in the world. And we're not going to let these guys push us around. And I was like, man, the world's really changed.
Did the neocons just take over the Democratic Party?
Don't say that.
Okay, listen, watch what happened there. This is Jonathan Land, this weirdo with the hat. And then on the left is Tim Miller, who's a lifelong Republican operative, worked for like McCain and Mitt Romney and those types. And this Jonathan Land, a longtime neoconservative who's worked at the Wiki Standard with Bill Kristol, listening to this woman correctly explain that liberals now cheer for everything they claim forever to hate. The strongest military force in the world, tight borders, closing the border. These are all things they used to call fascist when any Republican was advocating them. And so he, in response to her saying that, he put his little pinky in his mouth like a Bond villain. And he's like, did the neocons take over the Democratic Party? And then right away, Tim Miller says, shh, you shouldn't be saying that. Because of course, that's exactly what happened. That's what a lot of this realignment is. That's what this whole episode is about, with with Liz Cheney being attacked by Donald Trump as a warmonger and a war hawk, and why the reaction is so strong to protect Liz Cheney and to ignore their critique, because these neocons are in charge of the Democratic Party. These are their thought leaders and foreign policy gurus. Let's listen to the rest of that.
Changed.
Did the neocons just take over the Democratic Party?
Don't say that.
Yeah, don't say it. But I will say she is, look, man, she's leaning into.
All right, so they're absolutely correct about that. Anybody who pays even slight attention understands it's not just the neocons who were called war criminals 15 years ago and monstrous warmongers by Democrats and liberals. Not just that they've migrated to the Democratic Party, it's that they haven't changed any of their views. The Democratic Party has morphed into them. They're the ones, Democrats now, that cheer every war. It's the Biden administration funding the war. In Israel, it's the Democratic Party, every one of them, not a single dissenter, funding the war in Ukraine, always thinking that the role of the United States is to go in and change other countries' governments. It was under Obama that we did a dirty war in Syria to try and unseat Bashar al-Assad unsuccessfully. It was Obama when Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power and Susan Rice convinced him to join France and the UK in going and bombing Libya and removing Muammar Gaddafi, turning that country into just a melting pot of anarchy and slavery and ISIS and migrant crisis. This is what they do. This is who they are. And that's why people like Liz Cheney and all these neocons have gone to the Democratic Party and are going around the country campaigning for Kamala, not just because they're offended by January 6th, but because they distrust Trump when it comes to foreign policy. Here is this morning on CNN. This is one of the most ridiculous people in media. Her name is Casey Hunt. Whenever I see something whenever I see the media doing something as a herd that is just kind of remarkable in terms of its insanity and falsity, she always goes just a kind of step further. She's very emotional about it. She's very melodramatic about it. And I think she's one of those people who really believes what she's hearing from all these other places that she listens to. And she was really upset this morning that Trump threatened Liz Cheney with execution by firing squad.
4 days out from Election Day, and former President Donald Trump is escalating his violent rhetoric, suggesting one of his most prominent critics, the former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, should be fired upon.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy.
Let's see how she feels when the guns are trained on her face.
Exactly. Let's do that. Let's actually do that. Let's give Liz Cheney a rifle and tell her that for whatever war she wants to go fight it, that she wants the U.S. to fight it, she should go to the front lines with a rifle that will give her, and she can see the realities of the wars that she cheers, and then she can come back and she can say whether or not she still believes in those wars. That's exactly what should happen. Literally, that's what should happen. One of the main problems of our country is that doesn't happen. What happens instead is exactly what Trump said, even in that clip. That all these people sit around conference rooms and think tanks and adorned 18th century buildings like the Congress and the White House and the Senate and just send people off to war because they have no consequences from it. They have no impact on them or their families. And Liz Cheney is a classic case of that. So is her father. And so, yes, that's exactly what we should do. But you see on the screen, they're excluding that argument entirely. It says Trump says of Liz Cheney, quote, let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her.
Let's sit with that for a moment.
Let's sit with that for a moment.
Violent rhetoric, it's not new for Trump. But this stark imagery represents an escalation at a tense moment when the country is on edge heading into Tuesday, with 7 in 10 Americans saying they feel anxious or frustrated about the election, according to a new AP poll. And it comes after Trump has raised the specter of using the U.S. military on Americans he calls the enemy within.
May I make another observation about all of this, if you permit me? The theme of all these people is that it's Donald Trump who dangerously uses violent rhetoric. He's the one who threatens his political opponents with violence, like he did today when he called for Liz Cheney's execution by firing squad. But as I recall, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a pretty clear recollection that it was Donald Trump, not Liz Cheney, not Kamala Harris, not Tim Walz, not Nancy Pelosi. It was Donald Trump who was the target of two different assassins. One who came about 5 millimeters away from blowing his head off, and another who would have done that had someone in the Secret Service not detected him a few hundred yards away from where Donald Trump was on a golf course. Can you even imagine if Kamala Harris was the subject of two different assassination attempts in 2 months? But somehow it's Donald Trump that's spreading all this violent rhetoric, and this is all made up. Here, as you know, because I've talked about it so many times before, is one of the leading liars in the media. He's the person who invented a non-existent alliance between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, because Americans were only going to support the war in Iraq if they thought it was about 9/11, and he's what gave them the basis to believe falsely that it was about 9/11, the invasion of Iraq. Oh, Saddam Hussein, yeah, he's with Al-Qaeda. Jonah Goldberg he was at the National Review during the entire war on terror. He got that job because his mom was a well-known public figure, Lucianne Goldberg, who was a longtime journalist in conservative media, so that's how he got his job. And Jonah Goldberg, not Jeffrey Goldberg, Jonah Goldberg is somebody who avoided military service his whole life and used to write article after article after article when he was like 28 and 30, 32, like perfect military fighting age, all throughout the war on terror, about how he should go fight this country and invade that country. And the main attack on him by liberals is exactly what Trump said about Liz Cheney. Like, oh, why don't you pick up a rifle and go fight instead of other people sending you to fight? I'll show you in a second his response. But here was Jonah Goldberg today on CNN talking about the execution threat of Liz Cheney from Trump.
Look, I don't think you even need to call it fired upon. He's saying quite explicitly and unambiguously that Liz Cheney should be shot, should be executed by firing squad. That is appalling. It is a small facet of the reasons why he's unfit for office, and the Republican Party has made a disastrous mistake renominating him. All that said, since we're here for the punditry, I don't know what this gets him, right? If his problem is freaking out suburban women who don't like the chaos, don't like the violent rhetoric and all that kind of stuff, that's just not a great closing argument. Let's execute a political opponent who happens to be a woman because I don't like her. And like, does that pull more low propensity voters in his coalition to the polls? I honestly don't think so, but maybe they have some data that says otherwise.
If Access Hollywood did not have an impact in rendering this individual unfit to be elected president of the United States, and then forget everything that happened. No. But okay, then let's forget what happened for the next 4 years. So if January 6th and the rhetoric there did not render this individual unfit for office, and people are still have open questions about Donald Trump, then I don't know what else is going to move the needle. And to Jonah's point, there is no defending that rhetoric. We can try to both sides anything that anybody says, but that was quite explicit what he said there.
You would have a hard time selling a jury that that's what he said.
I would not have a hard time selling a jury that that's what he said. Although it was a statement made out of court, might.
I mean, can you believe these people sat here all day having like pundit gatherings and columns and news articles, all based on the not just false but absurd and ridiculous and laughable claim that Donald Trump threatened to execute Liz Cheney by firing squad? Now, I have to say, giving partial credit where it's due, Jonah Goldberg, after the CNN show, spoke to someone who explained to him why he's a complete idiot and why understanding Trump's statement in the way that he understood them was infinitely stupid. And it actually convinced Jonah Goldberg, and he went onto Twitter, not onto CNN, and he said, look, I said these things on CNN today that Donald Trump threatened Liz Cheney with execution, but I realize now that that's not remotely what he said. And he issued, to his credit, an apology, because it's just anyone thinking a little bit rationally will understand that. Liz Cheney, of course, took advantage of this and stepped out in front of everyone's eyesight to get as much attention as possible. Here was what she put on X, quote, "This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. We cannot entrust our country and our freedom to a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man who wants to be a tyrant. Hashtag women will not be silenced. Hashtag vote Kamala." I mean, she's really playing it up like, oh, he threatened to execute me. This is what dictators do. And it was because I'm a woman. I mean, the Cheney family have been lying to the public for decades. That's what they do. They're trained liars. And so, of course, she stepped up to play the victim role. Now, as I said, it wasn't every liberal pundit. I want to give credit to a reporter from Vox, Zach Beaucamp, who is a explicit supporter of Kamala Harris. But nonetheless, he had the courage to go onto Twitter, although he paid a big price for it, and post this, quote, "Folks, Trump didn't threaten to execute Liz Cheney. He was actually calling her a chicken hawk, something liberals said about her for ages. Look at the context. Trump is talking about giving her a weapon. Typically, people put in front of firing squads aren't armed." And then he quotes the actual statement that Donald Trump actually made. Now, in response, you can imagine how he was swarmed with attacks and anger and condemnation from all sorts of liberals in media and in politics, because that's how they keep these people in line. Anyone who steps out of line, they know in media, will be swarmed with attacks and hatred. They'll feel threatened in their jobs. One of the people who led the way in attacking him was a Biden White House official, Neera Tanden, who used to go wild on Twitter. That's why she couldn't get confirmed by the Senate for the position Biden wanted to appoint her to, so she just became a White House advisor. And in response to this reporter's honest statement, she wrote, quote, "What are you doing? He says the guns are trained at her face. It's clear as day. And ask yourself why you feel the need to defend this blatant threat of violence." Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.